On today's show, one of the games of the year in the NBA. Unfortunately, the Hawks were on the wrong side of it. A 1-point overtime loss in New York. We'll get into all of the stuff from the game, plus the latest injury news, unfortunately, on Larry Nance Jr. and Vit Krejci, and all that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1911 of Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you deep into the night here on a Wednesday into Thursday. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer at FanDuel, you get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet happens to win at FanDuel. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're also on YouTube. So please like this video as you're watching it on that platform, and please tell your friends about the show as well. We'll be diving in today to what became just a crazy game, a 149-148 overtime loss for the Hawks, the highest scoring game in the NBA this season by a pretty comfortable margin. It was really one of the best games of the year. Unfortunately, the Hawks were on the wrong side of it, but it was certainly a lot to get into on this one. They were very, very close to a 4-game winning streak. Unfortunately, they had a shot go begging in the final seconds to lose this one. We'll get into all of that later on. Plus, unfortunately, some bad news on Larry Nance Jr. and Vit Krejci, who's going to be out for a little while. We'll have more details on that later on in the podcast. But as for the game itself, the Hawks were pretty big underdogs in this one, down some of their key pieces in this game. Joe Johnson, of course, still out for Atlanta, plus Nance, plus Krejci. And on the road at MSG, a team that they'd beaten twice this year, to be fair, with the Knicks. But the Hawks were actually like 8.5-point underdogs in this one. And by the way, as a scheduling quirk, the Hawks have now played the most road games in the year in the league this year. Technically, it's 30 road games and one neutral site game, but they've been on the road a lot this season. So on the bright side, that means more home games at the end of this process after the All-Star break, but still probably some tired legs in this one, despite the fact that the Knicks were on a back-to-back. All that said, Atlanta was down 15 points in the third quarter of this game, and then they were down by 6 points with like 18 seconds to go in regulation. They erased all of that. They never led at any point in the game until overtime. It was resilient. The Hawks, I think pretty much all year long, have done this, where the Hawks have just battled and battled and battled. And yeah, it would have been awesome if they stole this one. They almost did, but in the end, nothing to be ashamed about at all, honestly, in my opinion, when it comes to how the Hawks played in this game and ultimately like sort of the narrowest of losses in this spot. So sorry, I said it once already, but the highest scoring game of the season in the NBA. Some of that, of course, is the fact that it went to overtime. That's part of it. There's only one overtime. It was also pretty fast pace, which certainly contributes to lots of points. The Hawks are a fast-paced team this season, but it was also an offense-first game on both sides. There was not a lot of defense played in this one. Obviously, the teams are trying to play defense the entire game. It wasn't terrible defensively for most of the game for both sides, but it was certainly an offense-leaning contest. And for the Hawks, they had a 126 offensive rating in this game. They didn't shoot it incredibly well, but they shot it well enough to win for sure. They were 57% on twos in the game, which actually is pretty crazy given how slow they started. They missed a bunch of, not like flat out bunnies, but like pretty makeable shots around the rim in the first half. That was one of the themes of the first half and why the Hawks were down actually double digits in this game. But they picked that up a lot in the second half and into overtime. They shot it okay from three. 14 of 38, that's just solid enough. Nothing special there, but they got to the line 35 times. Unfortunately, they did miss 11 of them. Now, I saw some people kind of doing the math and saying, well, if they made all their free throws, well, you can't assume 100% from the free throw line. As much as that would be nice, no one does that. But I will say, if the Hawks had just shot their season average, which is about 77% from the free throw line in this game, they would have made 3 more free throws and might have won the game in regulation. So certainly that's a contributing factor that I'm not trying to dismiss by any means. But just don't give them 11 more points, probably, and what is what I would say. But they were awesome everywhere else. There were really 2 issues offensively in this game. It was the early finishing problems around the rim, and then the free throw shooting throughout the game. But they were tremendous elsewhere in this game. They had 43 assists, and that's a lot of those. Obviously, it's a season high by a comfortable margin. Also, the most assists by a Hawks team since January 30th, 1993. That is a long time. That is 30 plus years since the Hawks had this many assists in a basketball game. The previous high this century was the 60-win team back 10 years ago. They had 42 in a game, so the Hawks were just barely above that, but still 43 assists in a game is crazy. They were like at times threatening the franchise record in this game. Didn't quite get there, but still 32 years between games like that as a passing team. They also did really well in the offensive glass this game. They actually grabbed 43% of their misses. If you don't know what that means, basically that, the league average is like in the high 20s, maybe 30%, and they grabbed 43%. They had 24 second chance points. They were awesome there. Only 14 turnovers in an overtime game. That was very fast paced. Great stuff there. A 12% turnover rate. All that's really good. They had 5 guys score 20 points or more in this game. So really good balance as well. Like, you checked a lot of boxes offensively. And again, there were the 2 real minor issues, but my short version would be I'd have a very hard time complaining about the offense in this game. Were they perfect in overtime? No. The last possession certainly was not like exactly what you wanted, but in the end, it also ended up with a wide open look from a really good shooter. So hard to say that was too bad of a process. And the Hawks just did pretty much anything they could have been reasonably asked to do offensively for the better part of 50-plus minutes in this game. Look, defensively, it wasn't great. Obviously, the Knicks are awesome on offense, which is certainly worth keeping in mind. I saw people like panicking about this. The Knicks, as of right now, are number 2 in the league in offensive rating. So there's no shame in not being able to stop them, especially when you don't have Jalen anymore and you're playing a little bit smaller and all those things. Some of that was stars as well. Like, Brunson was tremendous in the big parts of this game. Obviously, he's a all-NBA level player, so no shade there. Karl-Anthony Towns was lights out for like 3.5 quarters in this game. He had 44 points. They combined for 80 in this game. Like, part of that is maybe not great defense, but still, they made a lot of tough shots, a lot of star shots in this one. And as a team, New York had 66% true shooting. It is very hard to win when that happens to you on the other side. And again, part of that's the Hawks defense. Part of that was just some great shot making from New York. They did a great job, the Hawks did, in secondary stuff. Like I said before, the rebounding battle, the turnover battle, like, they won all of that stuff. They won the margins. In fact, the Hawks took 15 more shots from the field, actually just overall shooting possessions, than the Knicks. And if you listen to the podcast regularly, you will note it's a really good sign when you do that. When you take that many more shots than your opponent, they have to outshoot you by a wide margin to beat you. Unfortunately, they did that in this game, even with the Hawks shooting pretty well, honestly. And we'll get into this a little bit more later, but the Hawks really got smoked in this game with their 2 young bigs on the floor. Not necessarily together, but when either one of them was playing, basically, the Hawks got smoked. Moge was minus 19 in an overtime game. Don Barlow was only minus 7 in a smaller amount of time, but defensively, they both had like 140 defensive rating with him on the court in this game. Let's just say the Hawks missed Capella. They probably could have used Larry Nance in this game just for acumen purposes. There were mistakes. It's not all those guys. Again, like I'm saying, it was a team effort defensively. The Hawks did not play great defensively in this game. But if you look at the plus minuses, it was not just because of the plus minus. I always want to watch these games and give you the context that you need. But in this one, it actually kind of matched the eye test. The Hawks were really struggling with those guys on the court. When they had Okongwu out there, when they had their typical, Okongwu, when Niang was out there, when they had their adults out there, basically their veteran players, the Hawks won this game when those guys were playing. It was just the young guys got smoked, and it's part of the deal. When you have when you're shorthanded, when guys are injured, it is what it is. But look, my overall takeaway from this one, and I promise we'll get into a lot more depth on how this game unfolded if you missed it or just didn't see the entire thing late, was that the Hawks played well enough to win. There is absolutely no shame in this one. Yes, it's of course frustrating when you lose a 1-point game that you had a shot in the air to potentially win. The Hawks were actually up by 5 points in overtime. That makes it all the more frustrating, and I totally get that. But I'd recommend a little bit of distance to just say the Hawks did not play poorly. Yes, it's frustrating. Would have been great to go into the break with 4 wins in a row. But broadly speaking, the Hawks finishing up this way, as far as not beyond today, the Hawks going 4-2 in their last 6 games before the All-Star break without Jalen, with a bunch of injuries, is really positive, I think. And by the way, the 2 losses were by 1 point and 1 point. The Hawks are right there. They're playing very well. And given like all the panic that honestly happened around the fan base and around the league, even I've seen some crazy takes even the last few days about the Hawks are trying to implode because the Hawks are playing well. They have good depth on their roster, and they're still in pretty good shape. So anyway, long story short, not an embarrassing effort by any means. It was a fascinating game. A lot more to get to on the podcast, but no reason to sort of hang your head if you are the Hawks about this result. All right, we'll get into more of this game, plus, unfortunately, again, some injury news on Nance and Krejci. All that's coming up in just one moment. Today's show is sponsored by DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh and you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player draws 50 points or more in a game, you actually score a huge deal the next day at DoorDash. It's simple. Any player 50 points or more in a game during this season, 2024-2025 NBA season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order up to $10 off the next day from noon until midnight. After an epic performance like 50 points, celebrate by ordering wings or pizza or burgers from favorite places delivered straight to your door. Or perhaps you're actually around night owl like I am, honestly, and you actually need a midnight snack. You want to use Dash Pass to grab something that you delicious while you're actually saving big money as well. Or if you want lunch on the go, you can use Dash Pass to get your favorite meals with $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees as well. And now you save even more with this exclusive NBA offer. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save with any player 50 points or more. When they score that, members of Dash Pass get 50% off and order the next day up to $10 off. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders on participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. All right, and in a really fascinating game, I don't want to put this on hold for no reason, but I think this is pretty big news. I don't want to bury it too far on the podcast, so I'm going to pivot right now and discuss the injuries because this is a kind of big stuff for the Hawks. Like, obviously, it's not Jalen Johnson, it's not Trae Young, it's not even Reece Sherry, Dyson Daniels, but it's two rotation guys that got hurt within a minute of each other, quite literally, on Monday night, and got some pretty negative injury returns today on Wednesday. I promise I'll dive back into the game after this. But if you missed it on that show, I talked about it in depth on Monday evening, the foul situations, that all that stuff that happened there. But the two injuries happened back to back, and we'll start with Vit Krejci. He had the hard foul by John Isaac from behind on the fast break. He landed very hard, and he was diagnosed right away with a contusion in the back. Now the diagnosis is a, quote, non-displaced lumbar fracture. By the way, he managed to make the free throw with a fracture in his back on Monday, which is impressive stuff. The official timeline right now is reevaluation in 3 to 4 weeks for Vit Krejci. Now, if you're new to the podcast, I will say that I say this line all the time, so forgive me, but reevaluation does not mean return. Some teams do projected timelines for return to the court, like as far as game action. The Hawks do reevaluations. So when I saw like even today saying, he'll be back in 3 or 4 weeks. He could be, but reevaluation does not mean he's coming back at that point in time. Keep that in mind. It's usually longer than that. Not always, but usually longer than the timeline of reevaluation would tell you. And even with the All-Star break built in, which is a week off starting right now for the Hawks, Atlanta still has 7 more games in the next 3 weeks starting today. And it's very likely going to be longer than that for Vit. So he's going to miss a handful of games at the very least here. Quinn, by the way, said pregame tonight that Vit's actually been playing, in his mind, the best basketball he's ever played in his career. A pretty good endorsement there that I think I agree with, to be honest with you. They're definitely going to miss Vit. On the bright side, this is not a bad time for it. Obviously, you never want to get injured at any point. It looks like it's very painful, etc. But you do have the All-Star break, which is a week of not playing games. And also, the Hawks have made these transactions in the last week plus now where they have more depth. Like having Caris, LeVert, and Terrence Mann, who can both handle the ball some and do kind of some of the things that Vit does, is very helpful. In fact, the Hawks tonight managed to play the entire game without going even to Keaton Wallace or Garrison Matthews. So they could do this without that. And they'll still miss Vit. Vit gives them good depth. He's been playing well. Good passer, a guy they like a lot, by the way, on a cheap contract, all those things. Everybody loves Vit. It's just one of those things where, like, they can live with this. It's just if anything else happens, then you start to get a little bit dicey with your rotations. But obviously, hopefully, he will heal up fast and be back within about a month at the optimistic side. The other injury is more serious. It's Larry Nance Jr. The injury mechanism was not quite as glaring as Krejci's, Krejci got fouled in a fast break. It was very obvious. It was a flagrant foul, all those things. Larry's was a little bit more subtle if you didn't see it close up, but it looked more serious in the moment. I heard it was more serious right away, and the way he reacted, it did not look great. Ultimately, it is more serious, but it's not the worst case scenario, which could have been like, ACL or something like that. But it's a non-displaced fracture of his right medial femoral condyle, I think is the way you would say it. This is a very, very rare injury. In fact, Jeff Stotts, who I cite sometimes, who runs this blog called In Street Clothes, he's probably the leading NBA injury expert. He has a great database of stuff. He said today on Twitter, he does not have a single one of these in his database. That's crazy. His database goes back a long time. He's got a lot of guys. So this is a very rare injury. But What it means, basically, from what I can gather reading about this, is like it's the end of his femur is where this is actually at. It's like a cushion of the knee kind of thing. So it's in the knee area. The Hawks were saying knee injury. It's kind of knee injury. Anyway, he'll be reevaluated, the Hawks are saying, in, quote, approximately 6 weeks. So that's a lot longer than 3 or 4 weeks. If you wanted to be super generous and say that Larry could come back in exactly 6 weeks, which, by the way, I would not do, but if you wanted to just say the most optimistic scenario of all time with Larry Nance, he'd be coming back with 10 games left in the season. So he would miss another, 15, 20 games, something like that. So it'd be a long absence. I would say, based on this timeline, based on the reevaluation timeline, there's a decent chance he's not going to play this year again for the Hawks. I'm not saying it's going to happen. They didn't say that. That's just me reading the tea leaves. When the optimistic side is back for the last 2 weeks of the season, if that, last week and a half of the season, it's kind of tough to project him to come back, but he could. They're not ruling him out by any means. He's a vet. He'll want to come back and play. They love him in the locker room, all those things, but it's just brutal stuff for Larry. And again, getting timelines is hard. When Jeff Stotts doesn't have a timeline for you, it's like, all right, nobody knows what's going to happen here. But 6 weeks is a long time. In fact, I'll just say I heard behind the scenes, and not strong enough to report publicly, which is why I didn't report this publicly. I heard somebody told me, I don't know, again, someone told me offline that knows things, that Larry's out for the season. This is yesterday. Again, not like a strong enough thing for me to report, but it was like, all right. And this could align with that. It's not that right now. That's the positive side. It's not, my fear was going to be the Hawks announcing today that Larry's out for the season. They didn't do that. So that's a small positive. They will miss Larry Nance. Same thing with Vit Krejci. They're set up okay to be without those guys. The problem is, for any team like this, when you're missing rotation players, if anything else happens to anybody else, you're already down Jalen. Now you're down 3 of your top, 10 or 11 guys coming into the season, maybe top 12. However you want to say that with regard to where Larry was and Vit was, but 3 of your top, plus Belko was going to play this year. So you could say 4 of the top 12 or 13 players are now out for a little while. And that's not great. As far as what they do with Nance, it's a little bit more murky than it is with Vit. So part of that is that Clint Capella has this interesting situation going on. He's missed 9 straight games. First, he had back spasms. Then it was personal reasons. Then it was the deadline. And then it was he's been around the team. He's on the road trip. He's on the bench. He's been in street clothes. He did pregame workouts, etc. But he was not active again today. Until Wednesday, the Hawks had not given a single thing on Clint Capella. I asked behind the scenes. I'm not on the road trip, obviously, but I asked behind the scenes. No one was giving me any information whatsoever. But Lauren Williams of AJC did ask Quinn Snyder before the game tonight. And Quinn said, and I'm quoting now, Clint is in the process of coming back gradually, end quote. He also added that will continue during the All-Star break in terms of a ramp-up of sorts. And from what Quinn said and what I was told after by the Hawks, the expectation is that Clint will be able to play after the break. Now, 2 things here. Expectation does not mean guarantee. That means they expect him to be available to play. And by the way, available to play does not mean he's going to play. That's a key distinction. He's not been on the injury report the last couple games. So there's some nuance here. I said the whole time on this podcast and other places, I thought, not noob, I thought there was a conditioning element to this because Clint had the back issue. And I said this on the show earlier this week with Tower Jones. It was, from what I understand, an actual back issue. It was not just a total fake injury. But obviously around the deadline, they're being very careful with him. He was away from the team for a little bit, and he has not played basketball, hard, physical, full-on basketball in a couple weeks now. So I understand some guys could do this, come back. Clint's a center. He's got injury issues, long-term, all that stuff. All I would say is it's not weird to me that they would want him to kind of ramp up slowly to get right by the time they play again next week. What they didn't count on, I would imagine, is Nance getting hurt on Monday. And so tonight, could they have used Clint Capella? Yes, they could have. It would have been great to have him. I think they probably decided last week, honestly, that he wasn't going to play until after the break. And they weren't going to divert from that today for 1 game. That's my guess. I do believe the deadline was part of why he was not away from the team. We will never get a full answer on that. Personal reasons are personal too. Could be something like that. You never know. But what I was told, again, one more time, is that the Hawks have an expectation that he will be quote available to play next week. We'll see. What I would add is, as we'll talk about this game in more depth in a second, Clint Capella is still better than Nambarolo and he's still better than Moge. Now, Moge is a different player. He's playing more of the four, very different players. Clint Capella is still a competent rotation player in the NBA. I know Hawks fans don't always love Clint. By the way, he shouldn't start. He's not going to start. I think it's going to be a con move. That decision's been made. It should have been made. But the Hawks could use Clint Capella, especially with Larry Nance out. So if it's me, I'm going to play Clint. I'm going to play Clint 15 minutes a game, something like that. And that's plenty. And he can be in that role and give them some juice off the bench and be a rebounder and be a defender, etc. That's what I would do. But we'll see how they handle it starting next week. Anyway, that's a long injury report, but it was one of those things where these are major, major injuries. And I wanted to touch on that because it was not like a small, like, hey, I'll be back in a week. If it had been that, I would hold it to the end, but it wasn't. All right, back to the game quickly here. We'll go through the kind of first half, and then at the in the last segment, we'll go through the rest of the game and my player evaluations. The first half was not the best for Atlanta, to say the least. It was a choppy start. They missed a bunch of shots. I won't go through all of it, but early in this game, the Hawks simply could not make a bunny and a shot around the rim. Like nothing like, I should say nothing. There were some shots that were pretty easy that they missed. And also they just couldn't make any of the 50-50 shots that you might see around the rim. They were down 9 at the end of the first quarter. The Hawks had 3 dunks in the first quarter, and they were 3 of 12 on the other shots in the paint. That's not going to get it done. And by the way, they were 0 of 4 on shots that were just outside the paint on twos. So they were 3 of 16 on non-dunks inside the 2-point range in the first quarter. That's not going to work, obviously. There was a funny possession at the end of the first quarter where they actually had, I think they had 5 offensive rebounds in the same possession and only got 1 point out of it. So microcosm there. The Hawks were down 16 mid-quarter in the second quarter because they couldn't finish still. They did awaken after that after a pretty monster dunk by Dyson Daniels. But after 20 minutes of play, Brunson and Towns had 42 points and the Hawks had 45 points. So they just, they were scoring plenty, but defensively it was not going to be quite enough. But they did have a nice run at the end of the first half. 12-2. They got 6 stops in a row defensively, which was very important because that was not happening before that. Okongwu beat the buzzer to get into the halftime break down only 8 after being down 18. And they had a terrible, and I mean terrible, shooting half in the first half, which is crazy for a game that, again, had ended up being 149 to 148. They couldn't make a shot in the first half, but they did everything else really well and got into the game, basically. I'll leave it there for now. But other than Dyson Daniels, who had 18 points in the first half, it was pretty rough. But after all that, and I said this in real time, I was like, guys, it's actually a great sign that they're only down by 8 after the way they shot in the first half and the way the New York shot. That ended up being correct. It just wasn't quite enough to get over the hump. But we'll get into all of that, and I promise there was much more to come about the crunch time stuff, player evaluations, etc. All that's coming up in just one moment. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no place better to get on the action than at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you actually place live bets throughout the game. So yeah, even if you actually missed the opening tip or want to bet on the fourth quarter in a comeback situation, you can stay on the action the entire time at FanDuel. The live betting feature gets moments every of the game, really exciting throughout. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you actually combine your live bets together into a same game parlay if you want to do that. Plus, they have offerings like over-unders and point spreads, money lines, player props, game props, and much more. The FanDuel app is safe, it's secure, and they cover the entire range of sports as well. They have the NBA, of course, football stuff. They have baseball, WNBA, hockey, golf, tennis, soccer. They have auto racing, F1, NASCAR, etc. They have boxing, MMA, and so much more. Plus, the app is really easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly at FanDuel. Right now, if you're a new customer at FanDuel, you get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins at FanDuel. The place to go one more time is FanDuel.com to join up today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more at FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so the Hawks are down 8 points at the end of the first half, despite the bad shooting numbers. And the second half, they shot the absolute heck out of the ball. That is a short version. But the Hawks scored 77 points in the third and fourth quarters combined. And they were making a lot of shots. Trae Young was part of that, but it was not just Trae. They were still, though, down by 15 points mid-third because Cat was crazy for the Knicks. He had 36 points with 20 minutes left in the game. He just was bombing shots, and it was not because he was not being defended well. Ricochet couldn't stop him, which is not a huge surprise given the size advantage there, but Cat was great. But the bench came in mid-third quarter, led by LeVert and Niang, and led a run to get back within 5 pretty quickly. Big 3 by Ricochet along the way there. Trae hit a deep 3 late in the third quarter to get the deficit down to 3 at the end of the period. And the Hawks scored 41 points in the third. They had 12 assists in the third quarter alone. Trae had 11 points, 9 points each for Niang and Ricochet, and they're back in the game after that. They did have a nightmare start in the fourth, once again with a bench on the court. So I said it sort of briefly earlier, but the Barlow/game minutes did not go well. This time it was Barlow. They gave up a 9-0 run in like a minute and a half in the fourth quarter. The Hawks did miss some looks offensively, but the Hawks gave up a dunk, 2 layups, and 3 free throws. And without a Kongo on the court, they just couldn't get stops. Barlow, who I like a lot, to be very, very clear, defensively had a very rough stretch there at a bad time. And him being asked to play center, to be fair to him, he's played 0 center in the NBA, 0. He's been playing center in the G League most of the year, but in the NBA, his minutes that have happened so far have been alongside a center. Tonight, without Nance and without Capella, he had to play center and didn't go very well defensively. But they were back into the game, though, got within 8. I will fast forward a little bit here. Quinn called a good timeout with about 3 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. They got Dyson going down towards the basket for a bucket. They got to stop. The Hawks still never led in the fourth quarter the entire way. Brunson hit a pretty tough 3 with late on the shot clock with 2 minutes to go to put the Hawks down by 4 points. But Trae actually went quickly, drew a foul, and scored. Hawks were down 4. I'll fast forward again. Trae got to the rim once again and scored. They scored enough in the fourth quarter, back and forth. They just couldn't get stops until the very end. So I thought that the game was kind of going to be over when they gave up a back-breaking second chance bucket to Precious Achiuwa to put the Hawks down by 6 basically moments later with 18 seconds to go. And at that point, you are a massive 98% kind of underdog at that point in time. But the Hawks had to be perfect, and they were down the stretch of regulation. So Niang gets a 3 that they have to have right away. Dyson then steals the inbounds pass, almost gets a 3-point play to tie the game right away. Instead, just misses the shot, gets to the line, makes the first one, misses the second one, but then Okongwu and Dyson combine to chase the ball down on the glass, down by 2. Dyson gets the ball to Trae. Josh Hart gets overly aggressive, fouls Trae, makes both free throws. Not a given, but he made both, tie the game, and send the game to overtime. That was the first time the game had been tied since it was 8-8 in the first quarter. The Hawks were losing this entire game. And they come back kind of miraculously, honestly, to force overtime. And at that point, you're feeling pretty good. And then the Hawks scored their first 5 points of overtime. Their first lead and only lead of the game happened there. But then the Knicks scored the next 6 to kind of flatten that out. During that, Quinn had a challenge that was not my favorite challenge, but I understood why he did it. It was a challenge on a foul that was called on Dyson. Honestly, it shouldn't have been a foul, but it was not enough to overturn it, if that makes sense, in my opinion. That's the short version. They got some stops there, but again, missed free throws. LeVert, who was great in this game, missed 2 at that point in time. I'll fast forward a little bit more. A couple of nice, important buckets whenever things were kind of wavering a little bit. Okongwu had a great look to Trae for a nice cutting floater that they actually had to have. Dyson gets a turnover, always close to cutting a turnover. They force a miss, and they're down 1 with 40 seconds to go. 2 good passes in a row by Trae and Dyson to get Okongwu going to the rim. He gets fouled. He was 1 of 6 at the line at that point in the game. Went to the line and made both. So that's important as well. Take the lead. The Hawks, after a timeout, put their defensive line in the game with Ricochet and Man. They take Trae out, which is the right decision. But then Brunson just beats Dyson. And it wasn't like it was terrible defense, but Brunson just makes a star-level shot over Dyson, put them down by 1. But he went pretty early, so the Hawks still had a chance to take the lead. And that's at the end of the game. I'm sure everybody's seen it by now, listening to the podcast, but Trae drives to the right. I thought Trae got fouled, but not in a way that's always going to be called. Now, I should say, that gets called a lot. But people were asking me, was that a foul? Yes, it was. I wasn't surprised that the call didn't happen. Trae could have tried a wraparound pass too. I didn't love the process there, but it wasn't awful. I thought he got fouled. They didn't call it. He tries the floater because he kind of has to at that point in time. He misses it. Then Okongwu grabs a very timely rebound and finds Niang. And look, stop right here. All this lead up, the Hawks being down the entire game, build up, all that. You're down 1, and yeah, you're down 1. You don't want to shoot a 3 necessarily, but look, it's a wide. I would say that's probably a 50% shot for Georges Niang. Yeah, it's a 3, but it's a wide open corner 3 for a borderline elite shooter in Georges Niang. And he just pulled the string a little bit. It was just a little bit short. It was right on line. He didn't make it. And he knew it right away. It is what it is, but you can't ask for a better look. Quinn said that after the game. The process to get there wasn't the best, but if that's that shot's not any short of a open layup or a pretty good layup, that's a really good look there. So it worked out until it didn't. And that's what happens at the end of the game. But look, like I said at the top, like he loses this game at 1 point. No shame in that. They could have lost in regulation. And like I think at 1 point, I would have given the Hawks down 6, 5% chance or less to come back, even to force overtime. And they did. So frustrating, but in the end, a game that they played well up to win, just didn't win it. Quickly to the individual player stuff. I won't go like super deep because I'm already long on the podcast. So I'll get yelled at if I go any longer than I need to on the show. But some bright spots to be positive at the end of the show. I thought Niang was awesome. 21 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists for Niang. He hit 4 threes in the game, plus 18 to lead everyone on the Hawks roster. He was really good. 2 blocks. I think defensively played really well in this game. It was a showcase for the new acquisitions from the Cavs. Niang was great, and LeVert was great too. 20, 10, and 7 for LeVert, who's playing really with a lot of juice defensively right now. The 7 assists are impressive. 3 blocks for Caris LeVert. Like, I've seen Caris play for a long time, dating back to Michigan even. He's playing with a lot of physicality right now, and I love that. I think he's a really good player. And those 2 guys were great in this game. Great off the bench. So that's a positive. Terrence Mann was not as good, but he did play well defensively. 3 steals, 6 rebounds, just didn't have a great offensive game. He was on the court for some of the disasters as well, which wasn't really his fault, but there you go. As I mentioned before, Don Barlow had a rough defensive game in his 12 minutes. Nothing really to add there. Moge was really quite bad in this game. And by the way, I'm in on the Moge experience. He should be playing. It was a bad matchup for him, and he did not play well. He was 0-6 from the floor, and defensively, where he's been awesome, basically, until now, he was awful today. Out of position, it's a reminder, if you needed it, that Moge is very raw. And when it looks good, but he's kind of lost still at times, and that was very evident in this game. So nothing wrong with that. He'll have more seasoning. He should play. The tools and the talent are undeniable, but he was really rough in this one. Especially, I think it was actually worse on the rewatch when I was like trying to find. It was not particularly good. Elsewhere, Okongwu was really good in this game. 21, 14, and 5, 3 blocks, 2 steals. He was really, really, really good in this game. Outside of the free throws, he did make the 2 biggest ones of the game for him. But there you go. I thought he was excellent in this game overall. Ricochet was good. 16 points, 2 rebounds, and a steal and a block for him in 30 minutes. He's been playing really well recently. He's been double figures 8 of the last 9 games for Ricochet, shooting the ball really well, play a lot of minutes. He has 2 turnovers in the last 7 games total. Like, he's been playing it very, very well for any standard, but especially being a rookie. Dyson, also quite good. 23, 4, 4, and 4. 4 steals there for Dyson. Obviously, Brunson got him a couple times. That's going to happen. But Dyson's the best, or at least one of the best defenders in the league on the perimeter, if not the best. He was really good there. And offensively, he's been really good lately as well. Getting downhill, attacking, just being in attack mode the entire game, basically, and playing well. And then Trae had 38 and 19 by the end of this one. That's actually crazy because in the first half, I believe he was 2 of 11 from the field in the first half. So after halftime, he was 9 of 18 from the field, which isn't like incredible, but still really was much better. He had a rough start, like a very rough start. But after that, it was pretty much lights out for the most part. I was just some missed shots late when you're trying to be aggressive and hunt threes and stuff. But I thought Trae, second half and overtime was good. First half, he was not good. I actually made this joke, I think on Blue Sky, but I think he had 9 assists at halftime. And I was like, it's really hard to have 9 assists in a half and play bad. And Trae did in the first half, but he was excellent after halftime. So 38-19, there you go. All right. That's all I have on this game. I could have gone an hour, but I would get yelled at by the overlords, so I won't do that. But hopefully this was a reasonable rundown. Plus, of course, like the unfortunate injury news. Man, it's brutal time for everybody involved. Going to All-Star break, now you got to rehab, and it's not surgery in some respects, but it's what it is. So we'll leave it there. All-Star break is now. So the Hawks, the way it works in the NBA is if you're on the road at the end of the break, like you go your separate ways if you want to. They will fly you home if you want to on the team playing, but if you want to leave from there, you can leave from there. So the guys are now off until, I believe they haven't said yet publicly that I've seen. I think it'll be Tuesday is my guess. Trae and Ricochet are going to San Francisco for the All-Star Weekend festivities, which begin on Friday. The Hawks don't play a game again until Thursday of next week at home. And in the meantime, I am going to take a couple days now without doing a show because it's been very, very busy on this podcast the last week plus. I counted today. I think this is our 9th show in like the last 7.5 days, which is even for someone that does a lot of podcasts in a short period of time. And I went long with Tower Jones, friend of the podcast, on a two-parter this week. That was part of the plan there to kind of give you even more content. If you missed that one, listen to that one. It's always fun to talk to Tyler. It's a different speed than this podcast by myself, but it's always fun and a good kind of change of pace and a fun conversation. So anyway, I will have a show early next week with a full slate of episodes coming up between now and the game on Thursday, but a little bit of a PSA. It will not be for a few days now. Podcasts are not the easiest way to cover All-Star Weekend because it's like, it's not a game. Obviously, the Hawks do have participation. Ricochet is on tap on Friday and on Saturday. Friday's Rising Stars. Saturday is Skills Challenge. And then Trae on Sunday. Also, there's this new format of the All-Star game where Ricochet could conceivably play Friday, Saturday, and Sunday if they win Rising Stars. But anyway, plenty of Hawk stuff if you want to find it over the weekend. And then I'll wrap it all up next week, get you ready for the games again. And again, I said it earlier on the podcast, a lot of home games coming up for Atlanta. In fact, the first 3 after the break are at home. And I think it's like 10 of the first 12, something like that, are at home. So it's going to be a heavy, heavy rotation of home games for about the next month for the Hawks. But until then, a little break for everybody involved. Please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Please like the video there if you are watching on that platform. Also, if you are on Twitter/X, follow us at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there in my personal account at BT Rowland. I'm also on Blue Sky at BT Rowland, and you can follow my non-podcast work on the Hawks, sharing extra audio, writing words, etc. at patreon.com/BT Rowland. All right, everybody, I very much appreciate you listening to the show all year long so far. We're not going anywhere, I promise you. Stay tuned, enjoy the All-Star break, and we'll see you in a few days.